Greetings. Today's God Challenge is extremely important. We are discussing a deception in America known as separation of church and state. Now, one of the most effective ways of destroying one's opposition is to silence them. One could arrest them or persecute them, but this may lead to people sympathizing with them. Silencing is much more effective because no one hears what their opposing views are, and that is what is happening in America. Godly people are being silenced by the phrase, separation of church and state. They removed prayer and Bible from the schools, and when Christians tried to stop them, the Supreme Court said, no, separation of church and state. Religion does not belong in the public classroom, so they said. The same logic has led to the removal of nativity scenes, crosses, 10 commandments, and other religious items from public areas. But good God-loving Americans have been deceived because the separation of church and state is found nowhere in the US Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights, and to put it bluntly, it's not even a law. The closest thing to it is the First Amendment, which reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Did you see that? The First Amendment protects the church from the government. This means the government has no right to take prayer, Bibles, nativity scenes, crosses, the 10 Commandments, etc. from public areas. They have no right because the First Amendment says government may not prohibit the free exercise of religion. Now, if you're not sure this conclusion is right, then ask yourself this question. If the separation of church and state is law, then how did the Bible, prayer, the 10 Commandments and crosses get into these public areas in the first place? Why are there so many biblical monuments all over Washington, D.C.? For example, the Supreme Court, the Library of Congress, the Capitol, the Lincoln and Jefferson memorials are filled with references to God and the Bible. If separation of church and state is law, then how did these things get there in the first place? They are there because previous generations knew nothing of keeping the church separate from the state. Americans have been fooled. The Supreme Court justices, people who should know the law better than anyone else, they have made these rulings based on a non-existent law. Just think about that. So, where did the phrase separation of church and state come from in the first place? It was coined by Jefferson in a letter that he wrote to assure a Baptist organization that the First Amendment protected their rights. He was guaranteeing that the government would not interfere with their religion, and you can read this letter online. Today, however, Jefferson's phrase, which isn't a law, is being used for the exact opposite purpose for which he wrote it. So legally, separation of church and state is a false argument. Now some ask, but what does God say? Didn't Jesus teach separation of church and state when he said, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's? No. In the context, Jesus was speaking of paying taxes. Christians are supposed to pay taxes. In no way was Jesus saying that there's an area that belongs to Caesar that he cannot go. That would be ridiculous because Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Everything belongs to him. And furthermore, he commissions Christians to be salt and light to permeate all the world and make disciples of all nations. Jesus commissions us to go everywhere and spread the gospel in all areas of society. So there's no separation of church and state in the Bible. America was established as a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so the people, the Christian Americans, need to stand up and unite. You must talk about this freely everywhere. The government may not prohibit your free exercise of your religion. Do not be silenced. Satan is winning in this land because good people are doing nothing. You cannot be silent any longer. Stand up for your country. Stand up for your freedom. But mostly, stand up for God.